It's our prospects episode, and RotoWire's James Anderson is here to help us through who you should know for your fantasy teams. Who will make an impact later this year? How much fab should you spend on them? And when to cut bait on rookies who don't pan out? We'll ask these questions and more next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Happy June, everybody. By the time this hits, it will be June. Wow, the year is going by so far. And it was really great to see you this past week, Ruvain.
Yes, we finally were able to meet up. Our sons finally played a baseball game against each other after a couple of rainouts and I'd say delays and everything like that. And I think my son did pretty well.
Yeah, he did good. Well, my kid's team was did not do well. Let's just say it was a perfect game thrown against them by your team. The only player, everybody struck out every single at bat except for one kid. My son, he grounded out twice, but there's more to that. Your son came in for the last batter of the game just to face my kid. We couldn't have written the script any better.
Yes, and he completed the complete game, perfect game, and it was actually a mercy rule. We only played, I think it was 4 innings or 5 innings because it was kind of hard to watch after a while. But my son got to pitch against your son after many, many years of not playing baseball together.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I guess he got to a full count, and then he made contact, and well, great job. Your son looked good. No hits for our team.
I believe he hit 62 or 63 in the radar gun.
Yeah.
For a 15-year-old. For a 15-year-old, that's not that bad.
Yeah, I had my radar there, and I think it was 63 on the radar gun. So great job. It was a good season. I mean, my kid's team didn't win that many games. My son led the team in hits, so he had a good year as a freshman in high school. That's pretty good. More to come there. All right, well, we've got a really great show today, and a topic that we don't discuss very much. We're not prospects dynasty league experts, so we've got a really fantastic guest. You know him from RotoWire. Welcome James Anderson to the show. What's going on, James?
Hey guys, great to be with you. This is later than I usually record, but very very happy to be here with you guys.
Yeah, these 2 a.m. recordings are pretty hard, right?
Yeah, I mean it's honestly like nearing my bedtime.
Oh boy!
Now that I'm a father, so
yeah. Well, congrats, man, congrats.
Yeah, I'm wired. I'm ready to go.
There you go. You can go all night. All right, well, we'll get right into it. So, we're going to talk about prospects. We're going to talk a little bit about dynasty to get you guys ready for when prospects come up, and there will be a bunch that do this season. And, of course, you need to know them to win your league. So let's just start with the prospects that have hit the majors already. And I just wanted to get your take, James, on who are your top prospects that have hit the majors by WAR in terms of rookies right now. Wilyer Abreu of Boston leads all major league rookies with 1.8 WAR, followed by Colton Cowser. Joey Ortiz is third on there, and then we have a couple of pitchers. I'm not going to count Shota Imanaga or Yamamoto. They're rookies, but they're not exactly. Luis Gil, technically a rookie, and Mason Miller, 1.6 WAR. He's having a phenomenal start in his rookie season. So who do you consider right now as the top prospects that are already in the majors?
I mean, Paul Skeens would be Paul Skeens and Wyatt Langford to me are the top two guys. When we're talking long term, just for 2024, I think Paul Skeens is kind of in a class by himself. And then you mentioned a lot of guys who've kind of graduated as prospects. I think Jared Jones is fantastic. Colton Cowser, Wilyer Abreu is just really, really great. I love that they didn't try to, strictly pigeonhole him as a platoon only guy. Really excited about Willie Abreu's future, and I think Cedar Rafael is going to have a really bright future as well. I know that his batting average is not great right now, but he does so many things well. Luis Heel, Gavin Stone, two starting pitchers I like quite a bit. Kyle Harrison isn't performing quite at the level that I thought he might, but I do think he's going to give you volume and a good park, and love what I've seen out of Joey Ortiz and Mason Wynn lately. Mason Miller, obviously, one of the best closers in the game. So those are the guys that come to mind for me. I do think long term, I am still a very, very big believer in Wyatt Langford. But if we're just talking about the rest of this season, I think it's Paul Skeens and kind of everybody else. Christian Scott. Christian Scott is a pitcher I really, really love. He's still prospect eligible, and I ranked him inside my top 10.
And he's a Met, most importantly.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I hit on this in my mailbag that went up today. Mets pitching prospects, to me, was kind of the theme of the update to me. Honestly, I just was blown away at just how good the Mets pitching prospects are right now. They've got like 5 just really, really high-end pitching prospects, and obviously you're not going to go 5 for 5 on those guys, but if they can just go 3 for 5 or so, they're going to be in really good shape on the pitching side, and they'll just have to buy an offense.
And they have to avoid throwing their gloves into the stands, I believe, correct? Yeah.
Oh,
I think
dear.
that's something they have to avoid. Yeah.
Wow, I mean that's the way to get kicked off the team is throw your glove into the stands and say this is the worst effing team I've ever seen. Adios, muchacho. Yeah, so you know a bunch. Jackson Merrill having a good year as well. Gavin Stone up there. Ben Brown. What? Ben Brown just very, very what's the word? Without anybody noticing, or maybe people are noticing, is having a really, really great rookie year.
Under the radar.
Under the radar. Yeah, I'm missing some very good adjectives, sneakily or something. There's some good word out there. Anybody else, Ruvain? Did we leave off anybody else?
No, I think you basically hit most of them. And it's interesting to watch how managers play them and how much playing time they actually get. And James, I want to ask you, with the change of the rules with MLB and everything, and the fact that teams have more quote unquote incentive to put these prospects in there, do you see a difference in how quickly prospects are being called up, or is it basically the same like it was before?
Well, it's, teams are already kind of they adjusted basically immediately to try to take advantage of any possible like loophole or whatever, and you're already kind of seeing. You saw that the time that the most prospects used to get called up was like late April, like your Acuñas, your Chris Bryant's, Vlad Guerrero's. It was late April after the team had gained a 7th year of control. And now you see the top guys, if they're ready, if they're having success in the upper levels, and if there's a place for them to play, you're seeing those guys get called up now in late August so that they can maintain their rookie eligibility for the next season. And that only happens if there is, playing time available and if the player is kind of ready for that challenge. But you're also seeing there's disincentive in some cases. Like if Kobe Mayo had not gotten injured, and say the Orioles were like, hey, we want to bring this guy up, if he'd been good enough to finish in the Rookie of the Year voting, I think it's like top 3, that would have counted as a full year of service time for him. So that there's already kind of like different aspects of this that teams are factoring into their plans. They're always just going to kind of do whatever gives them the most advantage. But yeah, it's great that just the best prospects making the opening day roster is now just a thing that we can kind of get used to.
Definitely a win for the fans and a win for baseball, I think. Before we do strategy, let's talk prospects that should come up sometime in the rest of this year in 2024 who might make an impact, particularly for your fantasy teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's James Wood. It is kind of an obvious guy. Once he's healthy, Kobe Mayo for hitters. But it's not the same as last year, guys. Like I've got a ton of fab in some leagues, and there's not a ton coming. Like Cade Povich is a guy who he's not even a top 50 prospect to me, but he's probably going to command 25% bid in some situations when he gets the call. It's just there's not a lot on the way. I think you're probably going to see Jackson Holiday again at some point. You'll see Junior Caminero at some point once he's healthy. Jason Dominguez is a guy that I'm extremely excited for. I'm sure that there's certain leagues where he was drafted already or picked up already, but as soon as the Yankees have a place to play him every day, which basically means as soon as Aaron Judge or Giancarlo Stanton get injured, I think you see Dominguez up and producing for fantasy teams. But there's not a ton to get excited about. I mean, it's like Jackson Jobe is dealing with a hamstring injury. Cade Horton is dealing with a shoulder injury, and he wasn't even performing that well in the first place. So we'll see. We're going to see some guys that are like at AA right now get the call in late August, like I mentioned. But just in terms of guys that are going to really, really move the needle, it's the guys like Caminero and Holiday we've already seen. It's the James Woods, the Kobe Mayos. And then there's some pitchers that I think are interesting. There's some kind of under-the-radar pitchers. Povich, who I mentioned, but David Festa with the Twins is an interesting name. Adam Mazer with the Padres, I think will be heard from. Even Chandler Champlain with the Royals. There's going to be guys, Spencer Schwellenbach, who we saw, like he got the jump really aggressively after just 2 starts at AA. But we're going to see more guys like that where they're very good pitching prospects. They might not be household names, but we will see those guys. But they're not elite prospects. They're not the caliber of pitching prospect that we saw come up, it seemed like almost every other week last year.
Interesting. By the way, did you predict Paul Skeens would come up this year, or were you one of those guys who said, nah, they'll save him for 2025?
Oh, no. I drafted Paul Skeens in a main event and online championship and some draft and holds. Like I thought he would actually – I was sort of – before the season, I was expecting him to come up kind of around when he came up. But then once we got into April and it was just clear that he wasn't really meeting any resistance at AAA, I thought he should have been up even sooner at that point.
Right.
So I was drafting him before the season. He would have needed to get injured basically to not come up this year.
Right. By the way, Ruvain, James mentioned Jason Dominguez, Junior Caminero. We're in a home league together, a sort of limited keeper league, and we were talking today that, our strategy, we were just throwing this year. We're just going to, you know what? The heck with it. We're not gonna win. Our keepers are terrible. Let's just retool. What we did was draft keepers. We also drafted really the top players. Like we just spent something that I never do is just whatever it takes, $45, $50 to get. We got Juan Soto, Freddie Freeman, Trey Turner, Zach Wheeler. Just buy anybody because then you can trade him mid-season for someone. And we're actually in 3rd place in the league. We're trying to lose. And yet we're still doing all right.
But it is a 10-team league. I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of shallow, so we can actually play the waiver wire and actually still be competitive and have the option of trading off these guys. But I mean, if you look at the guys that we have and we're trying to keep, we have Junior Caminero, like you mentioned, Jason Dominguez. We're holding on to Kodai Senga. Hopefully, sometime he'll come back. Matt McClain, who's sort of, he was a prospect doing well last year, and we're just holding on to these guys. And the question is, how long do you hold on to it if you're still trying to actually win. If you're suddenly you're doing well, you hit the guys that you didn't think you necessarily hit, and now we're trying to find maybe. Do we hold on to these guys? We're trying to find that fine balance of competing for this year, but also being able to compete for next year.
Well, it's part of our strategy where, we said, you know what, let's do stars and scrubs, and if we're somehow in it, then we can trade prospect to try to win. And if we're not, then we do the opposite. We trade stars to win. So just left ourselves open. It was so funny because the day before, because that's something that you don't do this, I don't do. We always go, in the middle and get value, and we were just not doing that this year. And I called up Ryan Hallam. Ryan Hallam plays in like every expert league with me in Labor and Tout. And I said, Ryan, you know how I usually play. I know how you usually play. You do stars and scrubs. Can you just talk me into doing it? Tell me, just give me the confidence that I should just bid and just, give me the confidence. So it was a nice little 10-minute conversation, and you just, Ariel, you'll be fine. You'll do it. Don't worry. It'll work, So that was kind of funny.
It felt very weird going against what we normally do. That's all.
Yeah, we also had to sit for like an hour and a half and not bid on anybody after we ran out of money after 4 players. But all right. Well, anyways, back to the prospects. Before we do the strategy, could you let the audience know, James, for 2025? Maybe somebody has a keeper league or dynasty or whatever. Who are the prospects that we should really keep our eye on that are not going to come up this year but might make an impact next year?
Yeah, it's. The minors are really going to get emptied out, I think. It's kind of almost, there's just this sort of big wave of guys that I expect to maybe get their feet wet late in August this year. Like the Dylan Cruzes, Brady Houses with the Nationals and guys like that, who I expect to still be prospect eligible next year. Maybe we see Roman Anthony in Boston this year, but he might spend the whole year in the minors, and then he'd be a very interesting name. Carson Williams is probably the Rays' shortstop of the future. They don't really, in my opinion, have a ton of incentive to bring Carson Williams up this year, as long as Jose Caballero is healthy and remains productive in real life. I think, in Dynasty, I think Walker Jenkins of the Twins is going to be the number 1 overall prospect heading into next year, but I don't think he's going to be up early next year. Like, I think Walker Jenkins is, like, he's a guy that I think is going to be a star, and he's definitely a phenom, but I think he probably debuts in like August of next year. Maybe he just is so good that they can keep him down that long, but we do kind of have like a bit of a gap here. I think you're going to see. Once we get to August, any prospect that you see get called up late August, those are going to be blue chippers mostly, and you're going to hear some people clamoring for certain guys to get the call who won't get the call in August. Like, those are going to be the guys, but there does seem to be kind of a gap to me, at least in terms of the elite talent. We'll have a bit of an infusion of that after the draft. I mean, there's a few really good college hitters in this year's draft who are probably going to be quick to the majors, like Wyatt Langford, and eventually Dylan Cruz will be this year. But for the dynasty folks, buy Walker Jenkins, buy him. He might even not be as expensive as he should be just because he's banged up right now. But beyond that, it's going to be guys that we see come up late in the season, but not so late that they exhaust their rookie eligibility, like those guys with the Nationals, like Carson Williams, Roman Anthony. That's kind of the general group of guys. I mean, Noah Schultz with the White Sox, if you really want to swing for the fences. Andrew Painter, obviously, he's going to be healed up from Tommy John surgery, ideally. If you want to swing for the fences with some arms, I think those are some good ways to go. But tough to project pitching prospects almost 10 months out and say that that's a guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
So do you think for the Washington Nationals, September 1st, could you imagine that their outfield is going to be Dylan Cruz, James Wood, and Lane Thomas? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, if that isn't the case, I would assume that means either someone's injured or Dylan Cruz just couldn't handle AAA pitching. Assuming that he does what he's supposed to do at AAA, I'm not the highest guy on Dylan Cruz, but I still have him ranked as a top 25 prospect. It'd be weird if it was not Thomas Wood Cruz on September 1st.
So on to strategy, our strategy section, and I want to talk a little bit about hit rates on prospects because, when I'm drafting redraft, talk about redraft for now. Dynasty, obviously, you're looking for some long-term stuff, but in a redraft league, I tend not to be buying prospects. I find that, and I don't have the exact figures, but the hit rate on prospects coming up in terms of hit rate, meaning they're successful, you buy them and they're worth their value, is pretty low. We know we have the Juan Sotos and Ronald Acuñas and Bobby Witt that hit the floor running, and Corbin Carroll, and oh my God, those guys were just amazing, well worth their draft price, and they led you to a championship. But you seem to people remember the hits. They don't remember all the busts, and there are a ton of busts, so many more busts than hits. That the percentage is actually pretty low on successful. Now it might matter the pedigree, and we can talk about what makes what gives you a better chance for a hit. But in general, prospects are just a bad purchase from a long-term standpoint. I mean, we talk with Derek Carty all the time. Derek Carty is even lower on these guys than I am. The Bat X and the Bat really project rookies, prospects very low. So you'll never see one of those guys on Derek's team, and you hardly see them on one of mine or even Ruvain's teams. I don't know what kind of fantasy player you are or how much you take prospects in redraft leagues. I assume a little bit more, only because you're more in tune. You know them a lot better than we do. What's your take on redraft leagues, on taking prospects? Are they worth the cost in general? What do you do? And what's your take on hit rate in general?
I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. I partner with Todd Whitestone on some NFBC teams, and he's the one usually pushing me to take the prospects.
Interesting.
And I'm the one telling him let's not go nuts here. But he was the guy that he was like, dude, let's just take Skeens, and I let him have that one, and that worked out okay so far. To me, I really, as a guy that ranks prospects, I take issue with the sort of general broad paintbrush of saying, if you're going to say well, Jordan Walker, Jared Kelenic, Anthony Volpe, you start listing those guys, and then you say, well, for every Corbin Carroll or Ronald Acuna, there's a Jordan Walker, Jared Kelenic. I had Carroll and Acuna ranked much I was more staunch about how good they were as prospects, significantly more so than guys like Walker, guys like Volpe, guys like Kelenic. So I don't love the way that Derek sometimes just paints a prospect as a top prospect is a top prospect. I think there's kind of levels to this. So to me, it's if I think a guy is just really an elite talent and I think the price is right, then I'm gonna get in. I was drafting a lot of Wyatt Langford when he was going in the 250s this year in draft and hold leagues, and I was not drafting him when he was going in the 7th round or whatever. Once people realized he was going to make the team, because I essentially knew he was going to make the team early in the off season, and so that was a good value to me. And I still think he's going to pay that off, the price tag of being in the 250s. But I never drafted Jared Kelenic. I never drafted Anthony Volpe last year. I never drafted Jordan Walker. There's just lots of guys where I recognize that the hype has gotten out of control, and we're talking about the 4th or 5th best prospect. We're not talking about one of the best prospects to come around in 5 or 6 years. So I think if you can bet on the absolute premium talent and you trust yourself to know what the absolute premium talent is, and the price is right, if all those things align, then I think it's great. Like Corbin Carroll last year, I thought that was an obvious buy. Gunnar Henderson, same thing, just because I thought the price was right. But we got to March last year, and like Anthony Volpe was going in like the 6th round, and after our first pitch Florida conference, Jordan Walker was going like in the mid rounds. Like, to me, that was just crazy. So it's just, I think it's very important to like your evaluation of these guys on February 1st, unless it's to me, it almost shouldn't change when you get like all the way through spring training. Like if you liked a guy enough on February 1st, I think that's what should matter. You should not get swept up into these spring training narratives with guys.
Well, other than playing time, he made the roster, he didn't make the team. Factors in a little bit, right?
Sure, but you should have thought that they were going to make the team. Like my point is, you should have thought they were going to make the team in February. Like if you weren't high enough on them then to think that they were going to make the team, you shouldn't let the spring training thing influence you that much.
Which is exactly your point on Wyatt Langford, that when he was going the 250s and you knew he'd make the team, or you had a very good thought, then it was an obvious buy. But once he did make the team, his price no longer was warranted. And I like your answer to that, because you're pretty much saying you just gotta have to evaluate these prospects just as you would. There's no magical thing for or against prospects. You just have to value them properly. And if the market is undervaluing them, you buy, and if they're overvaluing them, you don't. I think that's a very simple but direct answer. I do want to talk about what leads to those top guys really being success. But first, it's the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
So when prepping for this podcast to look at the prospects, I went to MLB.com. It's the most new, I guess, the most quote-unquote neutral site. I went to MLB.com to look at the top 100 prospects for 2024. So, James, my question, my trivia for this week, and Aro, you could try to guess also. I don't know how well you're going to get this, but of the top 100, based on MLB.com, the top 100 prospects, how many of them have played in the majors so far this year?
Well, I know like Sam Dykstra, I know Jim Callis, I know those guys do great work. I can't say I'm privy to exactly what that list looks like. But I do know that, just given that it's kind of coming in waves right now, I would say that 40 of the top 100 have played in it.
So I'm going to guess a little bit lower. I'm going to go with 33, but I think it's higher than a usual year. I would say a usual year would be 25, and now we got 33.
Well, if you go to the website right now on MLB.com, the top 100 prospects in baseball, 12 have made it to the majors so far this year. Only
That's it?
12. That's it.
Oh yeah, I guess because all the guys have graduated. Yeah, so
well, you have Jackson Holliday, Paul Skeens, Wyatt Langford, Heston Kjerstad, Tyler Black, Kyle Manzardo, Marco Luciano, Christian Scott, AJ Smith-Scherzer, who just debuted earlier this week, Jordan Beck, Max Meyer, who's actually still on the list, and Victor Scott. So my question to you, James, is this: so far, 12 of them have made it. We've seen how Victor Scott just didn't pan out, but we also see how some other players, such as Christian Scott and Paul Skeens, have done well. So what leads to a player's quick success in the majors, and what can lead to their long-term success in the majors?
I mean, I think the long-term part's much easier. The thing I always look for is just strikeouts, hitters and pitchers. Short term, I just think there's like so much random variation and luck involved, and you kind of need to perform out of the gate most cases in order to continue to play. Sometimes guys just are dealing with like a cold stretch or whatever, and they just don't get any more opportunities. But I mean, you got to look at contact rate. You got to look at strikeout rate. You got to look at how hard guys are hitting the ball and how much impact they're making when they make contact. You got to look at just how talented a guy is, and what level of experience they've had. Like Victor Scott. I loved Victor Scott in draft and holds and in Dynasty all winter. But then once spring training came around, it was just kind of like, this guy's getting drafted in the top 30 rounds. Why? He hadn't played at AAA. He doesn't impact the ball much at all. You just needed him to basically get kind of lucky and hold a job like out of the gate. I just that was kind of an easy one to fade. But I also, my general kind of rules of thumb led me to not being on Aaron Judge or Fernando Tatis when they broke out, just because I was scared off by both guys' strikeout rates. So there is no just kind of perfect way to do it. Like I was in on Acuna for his rookie year. I was in on Corbin Carroll for his rookie year. But like, you're not going to be in on everyone. And the Tatis and Judge examples have kind of impacted a little bit how I go about it, and kind of caring a little bit more about how hard guys are hitting the ball than I did back then, and just that level of impact versus just focusing, as much as I was on the strikeout rates and stuff like that. But there's a reason why like prospects are such a kind of a hot button topic in fantasy baseball. It's just like nobody knows the exact recipe, right? Like if there was just kind of, well, if he does X, Y, and Z, then he's going to be good, then people would get all these guys right. Like it comes down to the player, like how mentally tough are you. There's so many factors, and obviously you care about playing time. I mean, the playing time part's kind of a given, right? Like you shouldn't be drafting. Like I love Junior Caminero, but I wasn't drafting him this year because I just didn't really see how he was going to get playing time, at least early in the season. So you should obviously be looking at playing time, but just from a skills standpoint, like it's just, I still care the most about strikeouts, both for pitchers and hitters. I really care about walks with pitchers. But it's just, you can find success stories in every shape and size, really. It's just, it's hard. And that's what makes it so fun to me.
So, with Victor Scott, the one thing though he brings to the table is stolen bases, and a lot of the young guys, sometimes the speed translates quickly. If they're able to, they have to get on base, but if they do, the speed plays right away. And if you're in a rotisserie league that values stolen bases, that's big. Do you see that as one, reason to draft maybe a speed prospect, because maybe that plays a little bit more, provided they have the playing time?
Well, guys are going to run more the younger they are. So you definitely want to draft young for stolen bases. I still think you need to be able to sort of envision the guy hitting enough to play. I don't like going after guys like Victor Scott or Miles Straw, Sturi Ruiz, those types of guys, just because I don't like constructing a roster that way, where a guy's just giving me nothing in the power and RBI department. But I mean, if you want stolen bases, you got to go young. And I mean, I did draft some Cedar Rafaela this year for stolen bases for that exact reason. And I thought that he was more of a power hitter than a guy like Victor Scott, with just as good, if not better, defense. And I knew that the new regime in Boston was going to really prioritize his defense. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't like the guys that are just going to be, hopefully you get 50 steals and maybe you get 0 steals, because then it's like, how do you factor that into your target for that category?
All right, I'm gonna go to Ruvain first for this. This is the biggest question that comes up: is, in an in the NFBC is a little bit different because the NFBC, the player pool. If a player hasn't played in the major leagues and nobody drafted him before the season, you cannot get him on the waiver wire until he actually comes up. So a guy like James Wood is not going to be available until he actually comes up. And then, of course, everybody is going to be vying to bid for him, and there could be a fab frenzy. It's a little bit different in home leagues, and maybe we'll talk about what to do, because then it's a question of timing, when to pick him up, right, as opposed to how much money on fab. But let's do the NFBC question first, Ruvain. Somebody comes up who's either a can't miss prospect or a good top prospect. How much fab are you willing to spend on somebody? Let's say they come up July 1st, mid-season. You got a half a year left. What type of fab allocation should you be going for? You're going to put a keep honest bid, sure, but how much should you be willing to spend of your fab budget?
I think it's really on a based on need basis. I mean, if your team is not doing that well and you need a little boost, and there's the possibility that that prospect can boost you in certain categories, whether it's power, whether it's speed, whether it's strikeout, something like that. If you need a little boost there, then it's worthwhile to spend a good portion of money. Especially, you mentioned July 1st. If you're 7th, 8th, 9th, and 9th in an NFBC league and there's no trading, you need to get that boost from somewhere. And if you look at the waiver wire for the past 2-3 months and you don't see anything, then all of a sudden you see this prospect coming up and you're like, wait, this may be the key to the rest of my season. Then I can see 20% of the rest of your budget, even 30%, just because you need to make a big splash. If you're near the top of the totem pole already, if you're near first, second, or third place, you have to keep honest bids. I wouldn't spend too much money because you're going to be balancing out your lineup for the rest of the year. And if you need a hole for an injury, yeah, you can put an honest bid there. But I don't see why you would spend so much money if you're in the top part of their league. If you're in the bottom part of the league, you got nothing to lose, because August 1st, September 1st, what are you going to do with the rest of that fab when you're in 9th, 10th, 11th place? You're not really going to be using it. So I think it's a matter of where you are in the standings, and it's a matter of how they can impact your team and if they're going to be impactful for your team.
All right, James, I'm curious to hear your take on this. How much money are you spending? James Wood comes up July 1st. What are you spending? Are you spending 35% of your budget?
I think you gotta really take a couple steps back and look at the whole landscape for that season. For instance, in the NFBC main event right now, I think the average team has something in the 600s of fab remaining, whereas this time last year, I think it was in the 400s. So that was because of the crazy influx of prospects we had early last season. So like each year is a different year. Right now, like I've got teams that have well over $800 in fab, and I'm looking at the landscape and I'm just like, who's gonna command that type of money? So to me, like if you're sitting on a bunch of fab and a guy like James Wood or Kobe Mayo get the call, even like a Cade Povich, if like Cade Povich is joining the Orioles rotation and it looks like he's, as long as he pitches well, he's going to stick in the rotation. I think you got to look at the player pool and say, like, well, if I don't go after this guy, like, who are some guys I might want to go after? Unless you've already spent a bunch of fab, in which case you probably shouldn't be in on these guys anyways. But, like, if I'm sitting there and I've got a ton of fab and I'm looking at the available guys that are coming this year and I need an outfielder, I'm starting, like, a guy who's getting platooned, who's not even that good, I would go very aggressive on a guy like James Wood, even if I'm not, like, I don't even think James Wood's a lock to be good this year. But I just don't know who else is coming in 2024. Now, 2023 last year, we knew a bunch of guys were coming. We knew Royce Lewis was coming. We knew Ellie De La Cruz was coming eventually. There was a top 25 pitching prospect getting promoted every other week, seemingly. That was a different story. I think you really had to pick your spots there. But I already spent like $300 on Christian Scott in a league because I was just like, well, if I don't spend it on Christian Scott, like I need pitching. What am I saving this money for? There's nobody else coming.
Yeah, obviously it's going to be case dependent, and you're right. You do have to look at the league context and to know how many fab dollars are available by your league, right? And it's going to be different each year. I do agree with Ruvain's point that really depends on your standing. If you're in first, second place, you probably don't want to exhaust your fab on that upside. You need just regular expected stats. So stick with picking up hot players, closer replacements, and stuff like and injury replacements and stuff like that. And but if you are in ninth place, you're not going to win going with nothing. You need a shock to the system. You should spend, and it's good to know the league context that this year you probably have to spend a little bit more. I mean, it might be $300-400 at some point. Remember when you see the winning bid, you're not looking at what everybody is spending. You're looking at the top bid, right? And that's going to be on the higher side. So to win it, it's going to take 300-400 or 30 to 40% of your fab or so. What about timing in terms of how early do you pick up a prospect? Now, obviously, it's always going to matter team by team. If you have a lot of injuries in your team, if you're doing well, if you have good players, and whatever your situation is going to be different. If you have a slot to pick up a player and you have room, you can either gamble on a hot player, you can gamble on a prospect. So for home leagues that allow you to pick up players who have not made the majors in advance, I mean, we had some guys who held Paul Skeens since the very beginning or picked up Christian Scott week 3, when is the right timing to pick up a player very generally? Is it a month before they're going to come up? So if you think they're going to come up in late April, early May, then all right, you're not going to draft them, but you'll pick them up week 2. If you think these are talking about summer prospects, wait until June 30th. What's the right timing in your mind, James, in terms of for home leagues that allow you to pick up in advance? Well, all things being equal, of course, it's case by case dependent.
Yeah, I mean the beauty about home leagues is you kind of know your league, right? Like you know how aggressive people are in your league on certain prospects. Like I'm in probably like 3 or 4 leagues that I would qualify as home leagues, and they're all very different in terms of just the caliber of like best prospect available, just based on league tendencies. But yeah, I mean I think you got to look at the premium talent. Like I would stash a Jason Dominguez for a month plus. I would stash a Paul Skeens, just indefinitely, right? But I'm not gonna go out and grab like even right now, if I'm in like a 10-team home league, I might not have room for Cade Povich right now. Like if I can go find a guy on waivers that I think has some potential, I'd much rather use the roster spot that way. But I just think you really want to focus in the home leagues, especially, at least the home leagues I play in, you really want to focus on like premium talent, top 10 prospects for hitters, top 20 prospects for pitchers. And if you can stash those guys for, a month or less, I think that's great. But once you get outside like the top 20 or so prospects, you should almost just be waiting for them to get the call, right? Like you shouldn't be sitting on those guys for weeks at a time.
Yeah, also, I have another question. If you're in a home league, and let's say it's a keeper league, when should you go about thinking about trading for or trading away prospects from your team to either think about next year or to even try to go for this year? When you try to find that balance?
I mean, yeah, it's tough. Like I'm in a home league right now that I co-own with a guy from college, and I think we're like 3-6 or something like that. And he was like, should we start selling some guys for picks? And I was just like, this team's actually pretty good. Like I don't think it's actually that bad. So like I don't want to throw in the towel yet. Yeah, I think in a lot of these home leagues, you can kind of take it down to the wire almost, and just give yourself a chance. Like, if you know what you're doing in fantasy baseball and you're playing in a home league, you shouldn't be out of it at this point in the year. Like, you should still have a shot, unless you just dealt with every single injury imaginable. But every league usually has a trade deadline. You want to evaluate things kind of leading up to that, and then go from there. But I like to just give it my best shot. Granted, I think most of the home leagues I play in are like head to head, but for Roto, if you're out of it early, sure, sure, make some trades. But home leagues, the great thing about home leagues is you just know how they operate, right? Like every year, like this is when you usually kind of move guys, and this is the price that's going to take to get the best prospects. But yeah, generally, like I don't want to throw in the towel or wave the white flag until it's just very, very obvious it's not happening.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's talk about the opposite. What about you pick up a prospect, right? You got him, but he's struggling. He's not doing well. He's hardly playing. When do you say, I'm just going to cut bait? We're talking about redraft leagues, of course. When do you cut bait and say, okay, it's time to cut him? Because remember, it's not like an injured guy. An injured guy you put on the injured list or whatever. You stop playing him in your active lineup, that's for sure, but do you give him 3 weeks of no success, a month and a half, wait for him to go to the minors, back again? At what point do you say, all right, this guy ain't panning out this year, it's a redraft league, move on?
If it's a prospect and they're not performing at a level where they're in my starting lineup, I'll move on basically right away. You like, even like I mentioned, like Cedar Rafaela earlier, like even through his struggles, he was still very usable. So I wasn't getting rid of him. And he's eligible at multiple positions and stuff like that. But like I thought Parker Meadows was going to have a very useful year this year. He's been really good since getting sent to AAA, but he was just such an easy cut for me as soon as it became clear that like I wasn't going to consider starting him because of the slump he was in. Then it's just a drop. Like it's much easier to stash a Tristan Casas or Royce Lewis or something like that, where you're not worried about the performance when they come back. With prospects, you're worried about everything. So yeah, I'd move on pretty quickly.
Well, Jackson Holiday right now in NFBC, he's in the minors right now. 94, he's owned in 94% of leagues right now. So people are still holding on to him, holding out hope that he will come back because he was the touted number one guy. So I guess it also matters what level prospect you are as to whether you're going to keep them or not.
Yep. No, definitely. I mean, the first sign, if you see that they're losing playing time, that's the first sign to cut. The other thing I would say is that you can see right away if they're adapting to the major league level. And if you look at their underlying metrics, the strikeout rate and the walk rate and the contact rate and stuff like that, if they're keeping their level from AAA and pushing it in the majors, you can give them a little bit more rope. But if they're just clearly not ready for this level right now, you can cut bait sooner. I check that. Some of the underlying metrics are good to check, and this way you can cut them a week sooner, so on and so forth. All right, I do want to do some waiver wire. And then we do have some mailbag questions. Thank you, everyone, for submitting mailbag. A couple more prospect questions. We'll get to them. So first, the waiver wire. James, let's talk about some players that you might want to pick up this week for your fantasy teams.
Sure. How about I started off with Met?
Oh.
Can you guys guess where I'm going with this?
Why?
I'm interested in David Peterson. I know that he's been around for several years, but he was just fantastic. Basically, exactly what you'd want to see during his rehab assignment, and he was fine against the Dodgers, but it's the Dodgers. But I look at the schedule and. He might get the Nationals and the Marlins in his next two starts. So I'd be interested in David Peterson, especially in 15-team leagues.
Absolutely. He was on my list here. Ruvain, who's a player that you'd like to pick up?
I got two outfielders that if they're not owned, I think they should be owned already. First one is Matt Vierling on Detroit. He's only 21% owned in CBS. He has 4 homers of his last 8 hits in the last 3 games. He's slashing for the year 289, 320, 503 with 7 homers, 22 runs, and 28 RBIs. And with Kerry Carpenter on the IL, he's going to get more playing time. So he's only 21% owned, and if you need an outfielder, because if you're looking at that waiver wire, the outfield doesn't, those people on the waiver wire kind of look bleak. But Matt Vierling, if he's available, he's going to get playing time, and that's what you're looking for. Another guy who used to be a prospect, who actually we saw in the AFL a couple of years ago in the Arizona Fall League, is J.J. Bleday. He's owned in 39% of CBS leagues. He's batting .242 with 8 homers. He is a lefty, sort of in a platoon, but believe it or not, he has played in every single game this year. Even if he didn't start, he was used even as a pinch hitter. So he's playing basically every day. He's batting .200 versus lefties this year, but I did a little deeper dive. For some reason, he's batting .250 versus lefties at home, which doesn't make any sense, but that's just what it is. For this month, he has 5 homers, 13 RBIs, and 17 runs, and for a guy from Oakland, that's pretty good. So he's a guy that if he's not owned, also another outfield guy, you need an outfield guy to plug in. He's a power guy. He's not going to give you any stolen bases, but he'll give you some power.
Ruvain, you literally took the 2 guys on my list for hitters. Vierling. I have Kerry Carpenter in a lot of leagues. I have Matt Vierling, but I didn't play him this week. Oh, missed 4 home runs. And Bleday. By the way, Bleday on the Oakland Athletics. Do you guys want to guess where does Oakland rank this year in terms of team home runs in the majors? You know, the 30 teams in the majors.
Much higher than anyone's gonna guess. Like, it's crazy. Like, they are. You can't stream mediocre pitchers against the A's this year.
No.
I'm
Do
gonna
you know
like
just how high?
8 to 10, probably somewhere in that range. Because
4.
Shea Langolier. 4.
Wow.
The 4th most homers. The
Brett
top
Rooker.
3 are the Yankees, Orioles, and Dodgers, followed by Oakland. That's crazy. But yeah, Oakland, it's streaming. You're right. It's very hard. They're hitting homers, and Bleday is definitely one of them. I will give you another 2 players. On the Braves, Ronald Acuna. We haven't done a podcast since Ronald Acuna was hurt, which I'm sure Ruvain will talk about. But Adam Duvall, Jared Kelenic. I know we don't like to talk about Kelenic on the show, but those guys are going to fill in a little bit more. Adam Duvall, I know he's 35 years old, but I still think he's got 25 to 30 home run power, especially if he plays regularly. I always have good feelings about Duvall. And Kelenic will get more playing time, so he should be good. And DJ LeMahieu is back for the Yankees. I take a shot on that one. He's only 30% owned on CBS. So those guys I would mention as well. Anybody else? Any other hitters to mention, James?
I got one. You guys mentioned a bunch of guys that I had picked up in the past couple weeks. So I'm right there with you on those guys, and I did bench Vierling as well. I got on all my good teams I benched Vierling, and on all my bad teams I started him.
And I had Carpenter in my lineup for all the week. Oh, jeez.
But Nick Gonzalez of the Pirates, I think, is a great guy to pick up if you need middle infield help. He clearly got better in the offseason. Just all of his metrics are up across the board, and he's someone I actually spent double digits on in Fab this past week, which has been a rarity this year.
Do the pitcher preview. You already mentioned, James, David Peterson on the Mets. Before I throw it to you, how about Tyler McGill on the Mets? He looked really good the other day against the Dodgers as well. He's only 25% owned. I know he's injury plagued, but as he's up, he's currently healthy. I don't exactly know when he's going to pitch next, so the Mets might shuffle around their rotation. They might go to a 6-man rotation with Peterson up also. But McGill is worth owning, I believe, even in more shallow leagues. I don't know about 10-team mix, but 12-team mix, I think he should be owned. James, any other pitchers to mention? Are they short-term or long-term?
Maybe Albert Suarez or Spencer Schwellenbach. I liked starting any Orioles pitcher.
Spell Schwellenbach.
Do you really want me to?
No.
Okay. I mean, it's tough out there with pitching. David Peterson was the one that jumped out to me, but anytime I can get an Orioles pitcher at home, I'm okay with that. So I'd throw Suarez in there.
Yep, Ruben.
Yeah, I got a couple that if you have the stomach for, sure. Matt Waldron. I know he's a knuckleballer, and I know he's faced the Marlins a couple of times, but he's 31% owned. He's a possible 2-start at the Angels and a home against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Those are 2 not horrible starts. In his last 3 starts, he's pitched to a 1.53 ERA, and he's a knuckleballer with only 4 walks in the last 17 innings, 17 2/3 innings. So if he can control that knuckleball, that's not a bad option. He's on San Diego, so he may get you some wins. So it's a possible 2-start guy. And I was also looking at any team that's playing the Marlins. That offense, it's I mean, we always make fun of the Pirates, but the Marlins offense is almost just as bad. So I this is a reach, but possibly Tyler Alexander on the Rays. He's only 4% owned, so this is for deeper leagues. He's in Miami against Braxton Garrett, and if you look at Tyler Alexander's numbers overall, they're not that great, but I happen to like this matchup just because it's at Miami. Braxton Garrett, you never know. He can have a good game, he can have a great game, or he can blow up. So he's a chance for wins. And again, it's the Miami Marlins. They're not really known for their power, known for their hitting or anything like that. So, maybe this year's Pirates to pick is the Miami Marlins.
Yeah, I was gonna mention Braxton Garrett. He's 50% owned, but the ERA numbers look lousy because he hasn't had a lot of starts and he had one really bad start. So it's one of those where people looking and the ERA stay away. Maybe that's why they're owned, but he should be owned even in more shallow leagues. I mentioned a couple more. Kyle Gibson. I mentioned him last week. I don't know why he's owned so poorly. He is very underowned. He gets quality starts. And he's to start this week. He's playing at Houston and versus Colorado. That's not too bad. Kyle Gibson. Dane Dunning came back this week. I immediately put him in to my lineup, and he looked great. He is versus Detroit this week, and then he's to start the following week. So Dane Dunning could be in line. Good team, so you can get wins for there. And Ben Brown, I got to mention him. I mean, 40% owned. 55 strikeouts in 46 innings. I'm not exactly sure how the Cubs plan on using him, either long reliever or in the bullpen or whatever. But that's interesting to me. He is giving you volume. So, if you don't have a great starting option for your number 7 starter and you want to stream and you don't like any of the other options, that's interesting too. All right, let's do some mailbag questions. First one. JB asks, will Gleyber Torres, sorry. I always say Gleyber. It just sounds better. Will he bounce back? He's currently a $3 player in 15-team mix right now. James, are you optimistic that Torres will bounce back?
I am. I think he's probably on the short list of most obvious positive regression candidates out there. He's not going to pay off what it costs to draft him, but I think he's going to be very, very good rest of the season.
Yeah, that's definitely a buy low. I mean, his homer to fly ball ratio is now at 6%, which is, like around...
That strikeout rate is so high again. I mean, it seems like every year he has a good strikeout rate, bad strikeout, good strikeout rate, bad strikeout rate. And if he keeps striking out, I mean, they don't have anyone behind him, and he's in a contract year, and there's always something to say about a player being in a contract year, so maybe he turns around second half of the season, maybe he figures it out. I don't know.
I looked a little bit deeper, looking at his in-zone and out-of-zone contact and swing percentages. It's really similar to his norm. In fact, he's actually chasing less out of the zone. So, and it's not his BABIP. He's not getting BABIP the whole way. I guess he's just getting a little bit unlucky with the strikeouts because he's actually doing what he should be doing. His power is completely homer to fly ball related, right? He should be maybe not a 25 home run type, but 20 to 25 type, rest of the season. Again, I don't think he's going to be a 275 hitter, but 255, 260, very, very possible. This is just screams regression, I think, right? It's a buy low opportunity. Next question. All right. Joe Larson asks, what is up with Adel Amador's season? This is the Rockies prospect, I think. He's supposed to have a good hit tool, but he has a sub 200 BABIP. Well, that's obviously just bad luck. Or, James, do you think it's bad luck or just weak contact? Should we just always ignore I'm asking this part. Should we just always ignore Rockies prospects because they never pan out?
No, I mean, I think a lot, like the batting average stuff, I'm not worried about Adele Amador's hit tool. He's gonna hit for high averages. My comp for him for a while has been like Rockies DJ LeMahieu. Like I think that's like the type of fantasy player you're gonna get at ceiling from Amador if it all clicks. But I don't think there's a ton of power in there. I know he's hit. I think he's hit like 3 homers this year in the past week or so, but He just doesn't hit the ball very hard, and he's finally playing at a semi-neutral minor league hitting environment at AA for the Rockies. So this was definitely his chance to kind of show that there's something legit in the tank there from a power standpoint, and I just think he's going to be kind of like a 15 homer guy during his peak seasons who hits for a really high average. But I think he's a good Rockies prospect. I think he's kind of closer to the guys that have worked out, like your Ezekiel Tovars, than like a Brendan Rodgers type.
Yep. Our next question: J-Walk and V. Scott. I'm assuming that's Jordan Walker and Victor Scott, I would think. Are they both too young to give up on? Will they put it, and when will they put it back together? Will it contribute this year or maybe in the future?
Man, Jordan Walker is just a total disaster. I think I'd be really worried about Jordan Walker. Now, if the Cardinals trade Jordan Walker, then I would become a bit more optimistic, because it would probably be a smart team that was buying really low and probably had some ways to help him out. But they're trying to play a first baseman in right field, and it's just been a complete disaster. I think they've done a horrible job with their roster construction. You can just look at like the Wilson Contreras signing. Like, they signed him to be their catcher, and then they found out after they signed him that he wasn't a good pitch framer, and then they had him break his arm by moving him close to the plate. Like, I don't think they understand how to construct a team where the pieces fit. I think Victor Scott can still end up being the Victor Scott people wanted him to be, but I think people just wanted it like a year ahead of schedule. But Jordan Walker, I've also heard that he just doesn't take to coaching very well. But that's the type of thing that you hear get kind of laundered out there when it's not working, to kind of cover the team's ass. So, I can't say that I'm bullish on Walker significantly turning things around. I think Scott will be fine, but I don't think he's going to be that impactful this year.
Is Jordan Walker the typical quadruple A player, like a la Joe Adell, who's sort of figured it out this year, and Jared Kelenic up until this point? Are those good comps to them?
Very, very good comp. Very, very good comps. He's that exact like caliber of prospect, and different complications, because both of those guys are actually playing their natural positions the whole time. But like if a smart team trades for Jordan Walker and moves him to first base /DH, I would start buying. I have no as long as it looks like he's going to be asked to play the outfield, I just have no interest as long as he's with the Cardinals.
I'll do one more question. Adam asks, at what sample size are you comfortable saying there has been an underlying skill change or development of a prospect? And what metrics, advanced or otherwise, do you monitor closely that suggest a player is trending upwards? Good question, Adam.
I never feel extremely comfortable. I do 6 updates to the top 400 prospect rankings a year. Like, I just did the late May one, which is my first in-season update of the year. And I love doing that update because there's a bunch of pop-up guys, and that's always fun. But I hate doing it because I know that the sample size isn't good enough. And I know that I'm just going to inevitably make mistakes due to the size of the sample. And so you can never get enough data on these guys, but you have to act before you get enough data, or you're not going to be able to pick up the breakout guys. I think you obviously look at strikeouts, you look at contact rate. That stuff's easy to find, especially on RotoWire. We also offer hard hit rate, and we offer a bunch of different like filters for minor leaguers where you can kind of narrow it down to like age. You can use some stats. You can sort by hard hit rate. Especially for guys at like AAA upper levels, they got to be hitting the ball relatively hard for me to be interested. But it's really just strikeout rates with breakout guys, like someone that struck out too much the year before, they cut the strikeout rate. That's basically the number one indicator for a guy that's about to break out.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't have much to add to that. Very, very well said. All right, Ruvain, time for the injury report. What say you?
All right. Well, we're going to start with how we have to start with Ronald Acuna. He tore his ACL in his left knee. He's out for the year. The recovery time for usually this is like 6 to 12 months. It's the different knee before he had surgery on the right knee. Now he has the left knee. The question about this, I mean, right now you have Jared Kalenic, like you mentioned, Adam Duvall of possible taking up, his at bats. But as being a keeper for Ronald Acuna, you have to question at this point. He has two surgically repaired knees. There are very few players that actually have two surgically repaired knees, whether it's an ACL or whatever it may be. The other one that comes to my mind was Manny Machado. He had bilateral knee surgery also when he was very, very young. Stolen bases really didn't become part of his repertoire anymore, so that's something to watch for when Acuna comes back. So just something to keep in the back of your mind if you're a keeper and you think about trading the guy. It's I don't know how much value you're going to get. I think his peak value has gone down at this point. A couple of prospect guys. Junior Caminero, he was placed in the minor league IL with a quad injury. Rays manager Kevin Cash said it's a grade 2 strain, and he can miss 4 to 6 weeks of playing time, which means you may not see him in the majors until sometime after the All-Star break. Evan Carter was placed in the IL with low back tightness. He missed some time early in the year with the same issue. We don't know how bad it is. Our old friend and former Met Travis Jankowski looks to get more playing time. Jordan Lawler, another prospect, had thumb surgery late in March to repair a torn ligament in his right thumb, and it's been progressing on schedule. Right now, he's going to start playing rehab games out in Arizona. They didn't give a timetable for his return yet, but it could be sooner rather than later. Jordan Beck, another guy in the top prospect, landed on the IL this week with a fractured left hand. He is going to have surgery. They don't give any timetable for it, but usually, if it's a typical surgery for a broken bone in the hand, you're talking about a 6 to 8 week recovery time, probably closer to the 8. Sean Bouchard was called up. Garrett Cole, he started the season on the IL with elbow inflammation. Aaron Boone, I don't know how you can trust Aaron Boone, but Aaron Boone said this week that Garrett Cole may begin a rehab assignment by the end of this coming week, which is very interesting. They're going to have to build him up, so we'll see how long that takes. Gavin Williams, another minor prospect for the Cleveland Indians. He's been on the IL with a right elbow discomfort. He threw batting practice this week. He's going to throw it again. And manager Stephen Vogt of the Guardians, Guardians, said that he's going to be heading out on an assignment soon. I have to mention this. Edwin Diaz was placed on the IL this week with right shoulder impingement. That may be why he wasn't pitching so well. Reed Garrett, Adam Ottavino will most likely get the save opportunities, and actually Reed Garrett got the save for the Mets earlier today. And this just happened earlier today. Clark Schmidt was placed on the IL today with a right lat strain. Schmidt will be shut down for 4 to 6 weeks, according to Aaron Boone, and then at which point it'll take another month or so to build him back up. So you may want to start looking for replacements for him.
So I have to ask, Edwin Diaz, shoulder impingement. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the guy hasn't pitched well, and suddenly put him on now. Is this just, hey, let's just get him off the roster for a little bit, get his head straight? I mean, how much do you believe this actual injury report? Because I'm not saying that I don't believe it, but I think there's a percentage chance that it's bogus. Or at least
based on the fact that the former Mets GM was accused of phantom IL stints, I think this is legit. I don't think they would do something phantom like this just because of that reason.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to get your take on that, Ruve. Byron Buxton is not injured right now. That's right. That's a shock. He's played 10 games in a row. Wow, and most of them as a center fielder. So he's probably just got a couple more left. All right, well, that's the end of the show. Thank you so much, James Anderson, for coming on the show. James, why don't you tell everybody where we can see your stuff? Where do you have, your dynasty and prospect rankings available on RotoWire?
Yeah, rotowire.com/pod for a free trial. Prospect rankings are less than a week old. Those are still very relevant, I would say. We got the batted ball stats for minor leaguers. Like I said, starting pitcher grid is invaluable during the season. And I tweet out everything I do from Real J.R. Anderson, Prospect Podcast every Wednesday. And I host the Sirius XM show on Friday afternoons from noon to 2. So a lot of stuff, but I tweet it all out mostly from Real J.R. Anderson on Twitter.
Amazing. Ruvain, what about you?
You can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out all these injury updates. And you can also catch my weekly article on Rotoballer discussing all these injuries as well as many others.
All right, I'm Ariel Cohen. My stuff over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, Beat the Shift podcast here, and on Twitter X at ATCNY. Once again, thank you so much to James Anderson of RotoWire for coming on the Beat the Shift podcast here. And from all of us here at BTS, wishing you a great week. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.